SIGA Youth Forum, about midway through day 2, so halftime oranges or lunch snacks. I guess you've been engaging with us and snacking at the same time over the course of the early afternoon. It's certainly great to have your company. Use that hashtag #StandWithSIGA if you'd like to engage with us. Let's move on to our next panel now. It's called Social Responsibility and the Power of Athletes to Influence Social Changes. This has obviously had added pertinence during the pandemic, where athletes like Marcus Rashford have certainly seen the value of their individual platforms. On this panel, we have Claudia, Kimberly, Alexandra, and Madeline. And our moderator, who I'll hand you over to now, is the founder of Dilemma, David Adesina. David, a very good afternoon to you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so my name is David. I'm an athlete advocate and founder of Dilemma. But for today, I am your moderator. And just a little introduction to the theme. So in this climate, we continue to ask, can we do better as athletes? Have we seen examples of individuals like Marcus Rashford, to Kaepernick and teams within the WNBA and Super League taking a front-facing role in addressing inequalities in our world. We know as athletes, we can't just shout and dribble, but today we unravel how can we use our spheres of influence to create social change and address sustainability. So it'd be great to now pass on to our panelists to introduce themselves. Firstly, Kimberly.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Lazzie. I'm a freelance sustainability consultant, sustainability trainer, and also a member of the Access Stars Admissions and Ethics Committee, which some of you may already be familiar with Access Stars from earlier talks in these past couple of days. So I work across a variety of industries. I primarily work with brands, with individual influencers, and with people who are looking to develop careers in the environmental sphere. A lot of that is through my work with the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment as a trainer on their Sustainable Business Diploma, and through Access Stars, where we support a private community of athletes and entertainers to educate themselves, network, and find income generation opportunities.
Thank you, Kimberly. Alexandra.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm Alexandra. Thank you, SIGA and David, for putting this on today and including us. Really excited to chat. I am the Environmental Sustainability Manager for New York Roadrunners. So I help develop and implement the strategy for the New York City Marathon, as well as all of our programming and facilities across the United States and New York City as well. And I've also worked with organizations such as Sport and Sustainability International, and I'm a part of the working groups for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Sport for Climate Action Framework, which is a lot of words, it's a mouthful, which is a framework for sporting organizations who have signed on to commit to reduce their environmental footprint. And really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Alexandra. Claudia, please. Claudia? Okay, probably technical difficulty. We pass it on to Madeline.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Madeline Orr. I'm an assistant professor of sport management at the State University of New York. I'm also the founder of Sport Ecology Group, a researcher with the University of British Columbia, and I sit on several boards on this exact topic. So I work with Eco Athletes, which is a organization that trains professional and elite athletes to speak up on climate change. I also hold the Canada and Caribbean seat for the Commonwealth Youth Sport for Development and Peace network. And I'm involved, again, in a number of projects that aim to accelerate climate action within the sport space. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Just to go back to Claudia, if she's available at the moment. Okay, we're just going to move on. I guess the opening question would be, having introduced yourself and the spaces that you're in, we're really interested to know what core issues or what one core issue within your sphere, and how do you move the needle and address how we create social change as athletes. So I'll pass it back to Madeline. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there's so many ways to go about this. And my number one thing is always, let's help people figure out what is their because statement, right? And so whether it's athletes, whether it's an organization, regardless of why you're coming to the table on climate change or on environmental action or on social action, I want to know, why are you here? And how do we help you communicate that? And so it can be as simple as, for me, I was a skier and I grew up in mountains that, had reliable snow from December to April. And all of a sudden, we don't really have snow till about Christmas, and it goes away by mid-March. So that's very visible to me. That's my because statement. It's what drove me. But I really am interested in seeing other people find theirs.
Thank you. Following on from that, Alexandra, lastly, Kimberly.
Yeah, just adding on to what Maddie said, I think doing a materiality analysis, a more formal way of, doing what she described is really important. So finding what's important to your organization and your stakeholders, mapping that out and having, sustainability pillars that come out of that. It can be, 3 or 4 top focus areas for your organization or you personally, and having that drive your decision making moving forward. So I think doing a materiality is important because you can really drive your decision making and your programming and your sustainability strategy based off of these areas. And for me personally, I watched a documentary on climate change in 6th grade science class and was terrified, but it really made me want to do something about it. And so ever since then, I chose to study in the environment in school and do what I can in the space. And I swam growing up, so I married the passion of the sports with the sustainability portion, and now I like to run and do triathlons. So that personal passion is there, and then I bring that along to the organizations that I work with as well.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Yeah, so I think that Maddie and Alexandra have kind of hit that on the head. It's really about what is your why? And whether you're an individual or an organization, having that really strong basis in why you're doing something and what that core issue is that you want to tackle kind of sets the foundation for everything that comes after. I think the other thing, so just to build a little bit, because Alexandra mentioned you can have multiple issues that you're passionate about or that you want to work on and things. And I think one of the key things in sustainability especially is that every issue is interconnected. So any sort of social issue, any environmental issue that you're passionate about, they are connected to each other. And it's finding those intersections and working within those as well that can really make it kind of come together and make a bigger difference.
Awesome. I'm gonna pass it on to Claudia. Welcome back. And yes, if you'd like me to repeat the question again, is what is the one core issue within your sphere, and how do you move that needle forward? You can also introduce the work that you're doing too.
Yeah, so hi, sorry about that. I'm Claudia McDonald. I am a current athlete, so I play rugby for in the English Premiership as part of Worcester FC and also for England Rugby. So I'm a full-time professional, and alongside that I also run a blog which is called Let's Talk 1%, and it's all about really small changes that individuals can make to be a little bit more sustainable in themselves, to live a little bit more sustainably. So it just follows me in a series of challenges. I take on a new challenge each month, and at the end of the month I talk about the challenge, how I got on with it, and what the pros were, what the cons were, what the difficulties were, how time consuming it was, sort of hopefully all the details that try to bring the barriers down and make it easier to take on those decisions as individuals yourselves. So issues within my sort of sphere, I guess, would be women's sport. And obviously there are an abundance of issues in women's sport in terms of, well, females are always fighting for representation, commercial rights, opportunities, pay, everything. So I guess in ourselves, especially within women's rugby are quite unique in that we can portray females that look different, that are different to what you see sort of day to day. So we can promote that. In doing so, sort of female rugby players become more of a role model than I think we intend to be ourselves. So we end up being a role model, even though we're not necessarily intentionally being it. And in that position, we can bring forward quite a lot of other issues that we care about. And obviously for me, that is sustainability and focusing on the individual and what differences individuals can make. You know, and that might not be as broad as the opportunity that corporations have to make different changes. And obviously that will be essential going forward. But I think we can't also doubt the impact of the individual and the role that individuals have to play within that sphere.
Thank you. There's actually two parts of that you mentioned that like I want to delve in further. And so I guess for all of the panelists, it's really looking at like, should athletes be expected to be role models and why? I think that's the first opening question, and then like I'll touch on another one after. So you kind of elaborate a bit more on that, Claudia. So I'll pass it to Kimberly to answer that question, and then just following on.
Yeah. So as Claudia was sort of saying, that you end up being like more of a role model than you might have intended to be. And I think that's sort of one of the things about athletes as role models. It's not necessarily your decision to be a role model or not. Based on what you're doing and the fact that you are in the public eye to some degree, people will look up to you as a role model. And that doesn't even apply only, in my opinion, to professional athletes in popular sports. That applies in small clubs with younger players looking up to older players. It applies in communities. It applies in kind of every context. So ultimately, whether we should expect athletes to be role models or not is sort of irrelevant, because they are, and they're seen as role models. And I think that it's really about how an athlete can take that position and what you can do with it. And what you can do with it to make a difference in your community or globally, sort of depending on what your reach and what kind of audience you have available to you.
It would be great to know, like, if you had any other extra thoughts on that, Alexandra and Madeline.
Yeah, well, Maddie can probably speak to eco athletes a little more, but there's a lot of opportunities for athletes to now speak out on climate change and have the confidence to do so. And so, organizations like Eco Athletes are fantastic, but even within, New York Roadrunners or other organizations that I work with, there's opportunities for these people that we look up to so much, or that we spend so much time following and watching, to really have a voice. And I think what's important is tying it with the passion. So if someone, we spoke about this yesterday, if there's a surfer who's, really passionate about ocean plastics, then that makes sense, and it validates their statement a little bit more. And so tying it with a personal passion is really important for runners. The heat exhaustion can be something that, runners deal with. So that's something that they can speak to, and we want future generations to be able to enjoy the sports that we enjoy today. So basically making it an authentic message is really important, I think.
And I think just to build on that, when you think about an athlete having to be a role model, right? Like, you are one, like Kimberly said, whether you want to or not. So it's what you do with that. And I think many athletes are really excited about being a role model within their sport. Because, you've reached excellence, especially, at the elite and pro level. Like, you are the person you used to look up to. And what would you have wanted them to say on these things, right? Like, you want your role models to be superheroes. You want them to turn around and like knock it out of the park every time. You want them to win every game, and you want them to be right up on the issues that you care about. And it's obviously not going to be perfect every time. And I think that's something we have to reiterate as much as we can, is this shouldn't be a burden. It's an opportunity. There are opportunities to get more sponsorship through cause marketing. There's opportunities to align yourself with different causes that will in turn create potential career options for you once you're out of sport. There are opportunities to connect with people you may not have otherwise, right? Like a fan of women's rugby may not have been considering the importance of taking the tube that day, but they may feel really good about themselves when that player turns around and says, hey, like public transit, we have to do that. And all of a sudden you feel like you're part of something bigger, right? So we can build community, we can make money, we can promote really good things and be part of solutions. And I think that has to be seen as an opportunity, not a burden.
Thank you. I guess to kind of switch onto the other side of it. So yes, we were looking at the role of athletes and what participation they can have within influence and change, but also this kind of definition of sustainability. And so now, what does sustainability actually look like in sport, and how can we better implement it within athletes' practices? So yeah, again, kind of passing it back to Madeline, it'll be great to kind of understand and unpick what sustainability can be within the sporting industry.
Yeah, this is my favorite question. So if you want to think about sustainability, I'm putting my teacher hat on now. If you want to think about sustainability in the purest context, right, we're talking about using resources now in a way that doesn't compromise the ability of future generations to use resources to meet their own needs, right? And it's about meeting our needs, not meeting our wants. And so the really tricky part is that sometimes sport toes that line between wants and needs, right? When it's about physical activity and social cohesion and building good skills in kids and all those good things, it's absolutely something our communities need. When we get to the point of some of these elaborate spectacles at the international level, it toes the line of a want, right? And so it's really important, I think, sport, because of that, has an additional burden to carry, in the sense that we have to be really good on climate change. We have to be very sustainable, because we are producing products, for the most part, that are wants, not needs. Now, again, that's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity. We don't at the moment have a whole lot of organizations that are really good on sustainability. We have a lot of organizations that are making all the right moves to become really good on sustainability. It's a process. And so, I would point to the Forest Green Rovers or Formula E as really good front runners in this space. And that's excellent. And you do it by, hiring a person to do this full time, like Ali, or putting a committee together who are going to be held accountable for how this goes. And then tackling, like Claudia said, those 1% changes over and over and not giving up on that, right? And so nobody expects perfect overnight, but we do expect consistent progress, and that shouldn't be anything foreign to athletes or the sports community, because we do it all the time. So we're just saying, let's turn that on its head. Let's apply it to social change. Let's apply it to environmental change, and make those small changes over time that will lead us to become a sustainable sports organization.
Thank you, Madeline. Would anyone like to chime in more onto that, Alexandra?
Yeah, sure. So I think, not every organization, sports team, league should do what makes sense for them. So, some have the means to sign on to the UNFCCC Sport for Climate Action Framework, and they can, work to reduce their footprint and their emissions. Some just, are so small, they don't even have the time or resources to have anyone help them or hire external help, internal help. And so maybe it's, having their athletes like Claudia do something on their own time that they're passionate about. So basically wherever, an organization can work towards being more sustainable is helpful. Obviously, in an ideal world, we'd love every organization to have a complete framework and targets and goals that they're reaching towards, they're reporting on, they're making impact in their communities. And we'll get there, but one step at a time. Some organizations are just taking baby steps towards sustainability, and we'll get there.
Thank you. Kimberly?
Yeah, I think that's really kind of hit it on the head. So the only thing that I'd really add to that, in terms at organization level, the issues that we see happening in sports are happening in all industries. So it's not just us. Sports isn't the only industry that needs to sort of answer for their environmental impact at the moment. And it's not the only one that is sort of struggling to get to that point of conducting proper materiality assessments and really focusing on the issues that matter to them, measuring their impact and taking the kind of correct actions. But it is one of the industries that has the widest reach in terms of potential positive impact. And I think that's really something to focus on, both for organizations and for athletes, is just that potential for positive. Once we get over, every organization has negative impacts that they need to mitigate and they need to deal with, but there's so much potential because of the reach that sport has to do good.
Thank you so much. And lastly, Claudia.
Yeah, I think I think Kimberly, for me anyway, really hit the nail on the head there in terms of the impact that sport can have on individuals. I think that sport allows the whole world to come together. Yes, we sort of stand behind our own flags and we support our own countries, and it sort of drives that nationalism more than a lot of things do. But it also allows us all to congregate in one area and have that singular thing that we're all passionate about, which is sport, and that we love, and it brings out the best in people. I think you only need to go to a pub after a rugby match and you'll see opposition from both sides. They're having a drink together, laughing about what happened on the pitch, and making friendships over it. So I think sport can be huge, and yes, we have to acknowledge the areas which it has to improve to move forward, and where it has to be greener, it has to be more sustainable. But it's not necessarily that sport itself is unsustainable. There's not, individuals kicking a football about in a park isn't unsustainable. It's the transport methods that we use to get to the events, the sort of the enormous congregation of individuals in one place. So I think as we drive more sustainable living methods and sort of traveling methods, then sport I think can provide a platform from which we can promote those things. So I think it does represent a very exciting opportunity, because people love it so much, because it has such a platform in itself to then promote other things that people are worried about, that people are passionate about. I can say from an athlete point of view myself that even in teams at the moment where you've got athletes pushing for slightly more sustainable things, even within sort of camp environments, within the sporting environment themselves. So I think athletes do tend to be younger, and the younger generation at the moment really are sort of spearheading this movement for a more sustainable lifestyle. So I think it is really exciting, and I think that it has huge faults in itself in terms of its unsustainability, but I think it also can be a huge platform for pushing things forward and for showing how we can work together to create something far, far bigger than ourselves.
Thank you, Claudia. I think one thing to touch on, and it's really recognizing like the reality of it all, is that yes, sustainability is a key concern that we need to address and work towards, but also recognizing that there are demands, the performance demands, there are demands on sport industries and athletes to, I guess, act in a way which promotes their brand, etc., so like promotes their well-being. So how would you say one must change practices to be sustainable but still maintain performance levels, whether it be sporting industries or athletes? It would be great to again hear from Claudia, and then we can rotate again. Thank you.
So how must we change practices to be more sustainable but not affect performance?
Yes.
So I'd say from an athlete point of view, I think there's a lot that's been done by athletes themselves anyway. So focusing on the actual sport itself. And then it's sort of the premise around that, which I think a lot of that goes beyond the ability of the team itself. For example, if we have a World Cup at the end of the year, well, we don't necessarily have the ability to create a method of transport that gets us from here to New Zealand that is sustainable and sort of environmentally friendly. So I think it's not being so overwhelmed by the monstrosity of the situation and just trying to make small impacts in what we can affect. So whether that is simple things like training during the daytime so that we're not then using floodlights, which again, it's a minor change, and it's going to have minimal impact really on the grand scheme of things, but it's focusing on what you can actually implement as a team, as opposed to being overwhelmed by the sort of extremeness of the situation. So that's what I would focus on for teams themselves.
Thank you. If we go to Alexandra.
Yeah,
and then Kimberly.
For example, at New York Roadrunners, we so I think there's kind of like two categories here. There's things that you can do that won't really affect the performance of the organization or the team, that will actually, help cut costs and take into consideration what your runners or athletes are wanting and voicing. So for us, we handed out plastic bags for a bag check. So people could check their items during a race, and we launched a reusable bag check program where people could bring their own clear bags, or we'd provide clear bags that could be used over and over again to reduce single plastic waste. So there's opportunities like that that mesh, the goals of the organization, what runners or athletes are wanting, and also, help your bottom line. Then on the other side of things, the thing we haven't mentioned yet is COVID-19 and the pandemic. And, during this time, a lot of in-person sports obviously have suffered greatly. And so it makes it a little bit harder. You just have to be a little more strategic when thinking about sustainability and what makes sense for your organization. And but I do know during this time, teams like Maddie mentioned, the Forest Green Rovers were able to double their sponsorship dollars during the pandemic in 2020 because of sustainability. So their sustainability sponsorship dollars, which is huge. So it's just looking for the opportunities, when your organization or team or league is running really well, looking for things that tie the triple bottom line with your stakeholders' wants and needs. And then when, there might be suffering due to the pandemic or another issue, looking for things that make sense with the goals in order for the organization to just survive and the sport to just survive at this time.
Thank you, Alex. And Kimberly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add from the perspective of like an athlete as an activist, and not letting that affect performance, both kind of on pitch performance and like financial performance. Because I think a lot of there can be a lot of fear for athletes taking on a social issue on how that might impact your ability to earn sponsorships. It might impact your ability to earn partnerships and things like that, and how you're perceived in the media. And I think something that can really help with that, I mean, from a mental health perspective, hopefully there are structures in place and things available to you from within the sport that you're in, but also just finding allies around the topic that you're passionate about. So sort of finding a collective group that you can all move forward together, because there's a lot less risk to speak out as a collective than there is as an individual. I think that's just a really key thing to point out, is just to get out there and find other people with the same interests that want to work on the same topics as you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And lastly, Madeline.
Thanks. Yeah, I have very little to add, to be honest, at this point. I think a lot of really good pieces were said. The piece that I would just like clarify or build on is Ali's piece about there's always an option. So when you, and I like, we're talking about sourcing, there's a sourcing ladder of like replace and then reuse and then reduce. And then you're right. So you work your way up the ladder, but the big ones, if you just want like a very simple framework would, if figure out where you can use yet less of things. So reducing, that's a really good way right off the bat to knock off use and consumption, right? So like if we can use less of whatever, insert thing here, and it can be the floodlights, it can be single-use plastics, like Ali said. If we can use less of them overall, great. That's a huge win right off the bat. It costs nothing, right? It actually saves you money. Then option B, if you can't reduce it, replace it with a more sustainable option. So that again, like we come to Ali's example of the bags, right? So if you can't have the bags that you like, or you need to have bags and we can't really replace that because this is how we work. This is what people expect. So what's the greenest option within that? And then finally, when all else fails, offset. And we haven't talked about it yet, but I think offsetting is not perfect. It's a Band-Aid solution while we wait for better solutions to come. And again, like that's not probably going to happen in the sports sector. It's going to be the transport sector that comes up with those solutions, or it's going to be manufacturing or gear or whatever. Like those industries are going to do that, and we're going to adopt them happily when it happens. But in the meantime, we can offset. And so just getting familiar with what offsetting means and, that market, and it is a market, there are good offsets and bad offsets, and you get what you pay for. So just getting familiar with that and getting conversational in how can we offset that crazy flight to New Zealand is a really good option. And it's something that makes that monstrosity feel less monstrous all of a sudden, because we did something, we did what we could. And that's all you can do. So again, no one's expecting perfect. We're just expecting progress.
Thank you, Madeline. And just before our Q&A, final question is this idea of how we communicate sustainability. Sometimes it's been argued that it's very kind of polarized to specific types of communities. And so for those who may feel like I can't focus on sustainability right now because I've got more pressing issues, I need to put food on the table, there's so many other things that are quite frontward facing right now. How do you go about communicating sustainability for groups like that? And so it'd be great to kind of understand your processes translating sustainability and social issues to alternative groups. Again, I'll pass it on to Madeline and we'll cycle back.
Yeah, this is a great question because I think we come up against it a lot. And anyone who does this work has this conversation on the daily. So, you know, I like to start with reminding people that like multiple things can happen at the same time and are happening at the same time. So the news likes to help us think that only COVID is happening right now and nothing else. There's nothing happening in India. Ignore what's going on in the South Pacific. Don't pay attention to the New York stock market yesterday. Nothing was happening with Reddit, right? Like they would have us believe that there's only ever one thing happening. And that's just because they just don't have the time to talk about it all. But what's very true about just living and being a human is that like we carry multiple truths at once. It's very true that I have X amount of dollars in my bank account at any given time, and there's climate change, and I have responsibilities to my family, and like these things happen all at the same time. We do it just living our everyday lives. So reminding people that all of these things, we can hold them in our brains at the same time and think about them when we can, that's enough. I also think, and I like to, like during COVID, right? A lot of organizations, especially in sport, are trying to keep their lights on, let alone turn them off. So giving people some grace with this, I think is really important. And we can't hold people accountable for information they don't have or options they don't have. So if a person's not aware of an option, we can't blame them for not choosing it. And if they're not able to choose that option because it doesn't exist, so for example, if you're working out at a facility that doesn't have bus access, I can't get mad at you for not taking the bus, right? So we have to only hold people accountable to the information they have and the options that are available to them. And then again, it's about those baby steps. It's the 1% that Claudia talked about. It's the tiny tweaks that Alexandra was mentioning, right, at the organizational level. So all of these things can happen. It's not necessarily going to happen overnight. And it's just about making those progress towards that eventual sustainable organization that you're reaching for.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alexandra, go for it.
So in terms of, communications at New York Roadrunners, we, started small with having a sustainability webpage on our website that talks about our goals and what we have done and implemented so far. We do things like plogging, which is picking up trash while you're running with a group, things like that, and started also communicating what we're doing through social media to our followers. And that's a great start. There's a lot more we could do, and there's excitement and opportunity there. I think the most important thing, again, is going back to this piece of being authentic and communicating what makes sense for you. We're probably not going to talk about ocean plastics because no one's running through the ocean right now. We're more of a running in cities and towns across the United States. So I think, communicating and talking about things that are important to us will be in our future for sure. And just authentically talking about the programs that we are implementing and, using our athletes to help them have their voice to things that are authentic to themselves as well.
Thank you. Kimberly.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about sustainability and you do, anyone, as Maddie said, anyone who does this work, you meet that resistance on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's really key to understand your audience and understand where they're coming from. So being able to empathize with the issues that they're having, with why they're resisting, with why they feel that this isn't something that's for them necessarily. When I first started working in environment, on my very first day, my manager said that this job is all about hearts and minds. And if you understand that, you'll do really well in this field. And that's sort of something that I've really carried with me because it is incredibly true. So when someone gives you the reason that they don't think they can do sustainability, don't dismiss it. Go into that with them, try to understand where they're coming from and see if there's a synergy there that you can help them to kind of bring it all together. Maybe the issue that they think is completely unconnected is actually very much impacted by climate change or air pollution or ocean plastics. And maybe there's sort of a joint solution that you can work to.
Thank you, Kimberly. And lastly, Claudia.
Hi. So yeah, I would say it's all about that sort of circular effect. Bring it back to them, bring it back to their organization, how it will benefit their organization in the long run. And then again, sort of bringing that sort of honesty and authenticity to what you're saying along the way. So that's what I try bring with, with my blog. And it's not about making big changes. It's not about going from, a 100-meter time that's 25 seconds to 100-meter time that's 12 seconds. If I'm applying it to sports, it's about reducing your time by a small amount and then realizing the effect of that. And I think the same applies, I guess, to organizations as well. They have their strategic planning, they have their objectives that they're aiming to work on and they're aiming to fulfill. And instead of just tagging it on as something they also have to pay attention to and sort of an extra chore that they have to work with, because inevitably then that is going to feel somewhat cumbersome and overwhelming as such, especially when you then attach the size of the issue as well. But actually, if you sort of integrate it into what they're already doing and perhaps use it to supply ways that they can actually save money and how they can cut off things over time, actually. Sorry, a lot of the time by actually being more sustainable, you're actually reducing what you're using, and it's the process of using stuff that costs the company money. So, if they're reducing the amount of waste they're creating, or if they're reducing the amount of energy they're using, then actually it becomes more beneficial to the organization in the start. So I guess there's that, and then in the way that you communicate it to individuals, you've got to be humorous with it. You got to engage with people. You've got to admit your own faults in your own journey, and recognize that you're not, as you say, you're not sort of pursuing perfection in this. You're going on a journey that's going to have ups and downs along the way, and any improvement along there is really beneficial. And it's it ends up just being a mindset of having a conscious thought about what you're doing and whether you could do it in a slightly more sustainable way, which at the end of the day is going to save you money or save you resources as well.
Thank you. And now we're going to move to the Q&A. We've got a few questions, quite a few questions actually. We're going to start off with Ruby from the Asia Committee, CONIFA, and her question was, what are the most important issues where athletes have the potential to make a difference? Who would like to pick up on that first?
I'll take it. So we actually are just in the wrapping up phase of a big study on athlete activism and what makes it work or where it falls apart. And it really, the answer to that, it depends on the athlete. And so the most effective messages, and I think we mentioned this right at the beginning, but the most effective messages are the ones where there's a really strong because statement. So a really clear propeller, like this is what's propelling this athlete to speak up, and an identity link. And what I mean by that is if you're a woman athlete like Claudia, you're more reliable and people are more willing to listen to you on issues related to women's sport. If you are a queer athlete, they tend to be seen as more credible on issues of homophobia or transphobia in sport. This is not to say that allies aren't important. They are absolutely important, but the most effective communicators are going to be those who have a personal identity linked to the issue. And so when it comes to climate change, it'll be the ones who are able to communicate, I do this because I care, and I care because, and then you can kind of insert thing here, right? So I grew up in London and it's smoggy, and that's a consequence of the same processes that are causing climate change. Or I grew up in a place near the water and I care about the ocean, and therefore ocean plastics are my driver. So it's what is that link, right? And making that really clear. And that's what tends to be most effective regardless of what the issue is or who the athlete is. It's just find your cause based on your identity link and your because statement.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to kind of chime in onto that question? Okay, cool. Thank you. Moving on, our next question is from Alejandro, head of marketing at CONADIEP from Mexico City. And his question was, can you give us an example of a current athlete that has used their influence to deliver a tangible social change? So again, who would like to chime in on that?
I think you can only, well, there are many athletes, of course, but the most sort of, well, the one that's received the most headlines, I guess, would be Marcus Rashford, or at least in my head anyway, I guess, English news and everything. But yeah, so he spoke up obviously about the lunches and the dinners that people were getting, and the importance that that was for young people, and he was able to use his platform to sort of magnify his voice, because I guess by him talking to it, there's an honesty, there's a storytelling element to it. He's attached to it because of his history as well. So like what Maddie was saying, he can talk about it because it was part of his life, and that sort of storytelling element to it is really impactful.
I'd also say, any of the eco athletes they're all doing amazing work. You can look them up. But also in the US, at least, Michael Phelps has did a lot of campaigning with Colgate and turning off the water while you're brushing your teeth, which seems like a small thing, but he has a large following, and a lot of people think of him when, they're running the water in their house. So I think that was an effective campaign for sure.
There's also an international movement in Protect Our Winters. They have an athlete alliance that go into schools and talk to little kids about how important it is to protect winter. So that's a cool one. And they have branches, I believe, in most countries in Europe, and then both countries in North America. And I think they're moving into South America now too. So that's one. Players for the Planet is another big one. That's baseball players who go into the Caribbean and Latin America, and they speak about different issues impacting the Latin American community related to climate change. It's their big things. They do big beach cleanups, storm recovery efforts, those kinds of things. And then just in general, in terms of social activism, the entire WNBA, if you follow basketball, has just really been outstanding in the last year in terms of advancing their causes, specifically linked to Black Lives Matter in 2020, but a number of issues along the way. So that's a fun Google search if you want to be inspired.
Oh, and just to add one other thing that we haven't touched on yet is college and university athletes. They have voices as well, and a lot of them, join green teams and are doing great work in the academic space as well.
Thank you. Kimberly, would you like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, everyone's kind of mentioned the names that come to mind right away, but I think that was a really good point about college and university athletes, is that we're not just talking about professional athletes with massive audiences. Everyone can be a part of this.
Thank you. We also have a question from Anne, who says, how do you think COVID has impacted the perception of sustainability issues?
I think people think it's an either or, and I think that's just a false narrative we need to nip right now. People think you can either come back from COVID and rebuild your organization, or you can focus on social justice issues, environmental issues, all the other things. And the reality is these things all have to happen at the same time. And that sounds like a big burden and a lot to take on. It is, and that's okay. We're looking for small progress. So I think that's one of the pieces where, many organizations are just focusing on surviving COVID, and no one's faulting them for taking their time on other things right now in this moment. But as they build their plans to come back, so when we come back, what's it going to look like? These conversations are happening in every boardroom at every sports organization right now. And I think it's really important that somebody in that room, if you have the energy and if you have the boldness to do it, bring up, okay, great. And then how are we going to promote women athletes? And also, how are we going to take on sustainability? And ask the question, because you never know what the answer is going to be. And sometimes it just takes bringing it up to get the ball rolling, even just a little bit. So I think COVID has presented a false narrative that we really need to tackle.
Would anyone else like to? Okay.
Sorry.
Alex?
Yeah, keeping it in mind as we, quote unquote, build back better, and just in every decision making, if you have the capacity to do so, is important. And a few of our colleagues in this sports sustainability space wrote a guide on, incorporating sustainability into sports and building back better. If you reach out to us later, we can send that your way.
Thank you. Was there anyone else who would like to
Can
share?
I just jump in for a second? I think with COVID, we kind of saw a lot of up and downs in sustainability. So I was working quite heavily in like food retail when COVID first hit, and food to go, which was one of the hardest hit industries. But also a lot of the sustainability initiatives there focus around reusables. And that was almost an immediate can all the reusables, don't touch anything anyone else has touched. So no reusable cups, no reusable bags, no reusable anything, basically. So we saw that hit sustainability quite hard. But then later, once everyone had kind of been in lockdown for a while, we started to see a lot coming out about, look how clean the water looks now. Look at the canals in Venice. Look at how clear the air is in London right now, because there was so few cars on the road. And it sort of started to get it into people's heads of like, things can be different than how we're used to doing them. And I feel like that sort of continued to go up and down throughout the past year or so. And recently, one thing I've noticed is that those conversations that need to be happening are starting to happen a lot more. And I think it's actually accelerated it for a lot of industries, because you start to see organizations looking for in-house sustainability people more than they previously would have. A very large call for like green engineering skills and things like that, and people with sustainability knowledge. And a lot of companies are really kind of crying out for people that they can partner with to get that message out, who are credible in sustainability. And I think that's another opportunity for athletes who have already started to establish themselves with like a personal brand that is associated with sustainability, is that that's just continued to multiply. And I think it's only going to grow.
Thank you. Was there anyone else who wanted to add? No? Okay, cool. So we have one final question, and this is from Richard. He is part of the International Tennis Integrity Agency, and he asked, can sponsors do more to support athletes and drive issues forward? Who would like to begin with their answer? I can see quite a few people nodding, so.
Does anyone want to start, or I'll start? Yeah, I mean, they can be huge. There was a big thing in the news, and I'll talk about it because it's women's rugby, therefore I know more about it. But it was with Canterbury, and Canterbury were the kit supplier for the Ireland women's team, and they chose to use a number of models to show off or to launch the new kit, as opposed to using female players. Whereas on the reverse of that, with the men, they used male players to promote the kit, and obviously not models. And a large sort of social media protest, I guess, went off because of it. And as a result of it, Canterbury then ended up changing their policy and contacting an agency, which is the Perception Agency. It's run by a female rugby player herself. And Canterbury have since worked with this agency to change their own policies, and they've committed to always using female athletes to promote their kit. Having said that, I think there are some brands, again, that work brilliantly with women in sport and with female sports, and the same for sustainability and the same for supporting athletes. I think it's important that some of the role does lay with the athlete themselves, and for the athlete to choose which brands and which companies they're choosing to align themselves with. And I think that the more importance athletes put on that, then the better it will be. I think we get to choose. We build up our own brand. Athletes choose how they want to be perceived by the public, because, as we've said before, they are role models. And you create your own brand. You spend a long time sort of creating this brand, and you've got to choose what companies you're going to use to support that brand. So I think, yes, companies need to do more, but I think by athletes choosing certain brands, we'll start to see that companies are forced to doing more, because it will be a point of difference that athletes use to choose one brand over another.
Can I add on really quick on the end there? I think one thing that companies can do to support that decision making by athletes is to just be much more transparent about what their values are, about what their sustainability policies are. And that really just gives the athlete the opportunity to evaluate brands on sort of an even playing field.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you, everyone. We're going to have to, I know this conversation is literally, there's so much that we can talk about, so much more that we can address, but we're going to have to round it up for today. Hopefully it'll be another part 2 or part 3. But yes, thank you all for coming. And again, appreciations and like applause to our panelists too, for being able to kind of share and address all these concerns. Thank you to the audience members who asked so many like pressing questions. And again, we hope that we can again move the needle forward and within our spaces of influence, create true and authentic change. Thank you all and have a great day, evening, morning. Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello all, my name is Tomás Medeiros and I am a proud member of the SIGA Youth Council. If you want to make your voice heard and you want to take a stand for what's right for sports, join me and many others in the largest global movement for sports integrity. And join me as well in the first ever SIGA Youth Forum. Today and tomorrow, 27th and 28th of January, we can all collectively make sport safer, cleaner, and quite frankly, better for the years to come. Hope to see you there.